killed a man by doing nothing, and then I killed his reputation to save my own skin. It's a debt that has been collecting interest for 40 years, and lately the bill has come due in ways I never saw coming. I live in a small town on the Maine coast now, where the fog rolls in so thick you can't see your own hands in front of your face. It suits me. People here see the gray hair beneath the steady hands of a retired lawman, and they think they see a man who spent his life upholding the line between right and wrong. They don't see the rot underneath. It was June 1986. I was 24, wearing a badge that felt heavier than it actually was. I was ambitious, or maybe I was just terrified of being ordinary. I wanted to be the kind of cop the chief noticed. I pulled over a red Mustang doing 85 in a 45 zone near the old quarry road. The engine was still ticking, hot and angry in the midnight air. The driver was Sarah. She was 19, blonde, and she smelled like cheap gin and expensive perfume. She was also the chief's only daughter. She looked at me with those wide, watery eyes that knew exactly how much power she held over a junior patrolman, and she whispered, "Please, Elias, my dad will kill me. I'm almost home. Just let me go." I should have breathalyzed her. I should have handcuffed her to the steering column. I should have been a cop. Instead, I was a coward. I told her to drive slow, get home, and keep her mouth shut. I watched her taillights disappear into the mist, feeling a sick sense of pride that I had done a favor for the man who controlled my career. 10 minutes later, the call came over the radio. A code 3 at the intersection of Blackwood and Maine. When I arrived, the red Mustang was wrapped around a telephone pole. The headlights were smashed, one of them flickering like a dying eye. But it wasn't the car that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the man lying 30 feet away in a wet grass. He had been walking home from the late shift at the cannery. He had a lunchbox spilled on the pavement, a ham sandwich wrapped in foil, a thermos of coffee still steaming in the cold air. He wasn't moving. And Sarah was slumped over the airbag, sobbing, unhurt, but the smell of gin was now unmistakable in the enclosed space of the wreck. The first thing I did wasn't check the man's pulse. The first thing I did was look around the deserted road to see if anyone else had seen me pull her over 10 minutes prior. The road was empty, just the sound of the Atlantic crashing against the cliffs in the distance. I realized in that moment that if I reported the truth, Sarah would go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. The chief would be ruined, and I would be the idiot who let a drunk girl drive a weapon. So I made a choice. I dragged the man's body. I dragged Thomas Miller 5 feet to the left, out of the crosswalk and into a dark patch of the road where there were no streetlights. Then I reached into the trunk of my own cruiser. I had a bottle of confiscated whiskey from a different stop earlier that night. I poured it over his jacket. I splashed some on a pavement near his hand. I made it look like a drunk had stumbled into the path of a sober, terrified girl. I killed his name before his family even knew he was gone. And then I picked up the radio and called it in. The chief arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't look at his daughter first. He looked at me. He saw the whiskey bottle in my hand, the wet pavement, and the body of Thomas Miller moved into the shadows. He saw exactly what I had done. He didn't say thank you. He didn't hug Sarah. He just walked over to me, stood so close I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath, and took the empty bottle from my hand. "You're a good officer, Elias," he said. His voice was like grinding stones. "You have a bright future. Go process the scene. I'll take my girl home." That was the contract, signed in the dark, witnessed by a dead man. The investigation was a formality. I wrote the report myself. I described the strong odor of alcohol emanating from the deceased. I noted how he had stepped into the path of a vehicle while wearing dark clothing. I watched Thomas Miller's widow sit in the back of the courtroom during the inquest, her face a mask of gray exhaustion. She had 3 children. The youngest was barely 4. She didn't cry when the judge ruled it an accidental death, with no fault found on the driver. She just looked at the floor. I think she knew her husband didn't drink. Thomas was a deacon at the Baptist church. He was a man who saved his pennies for his kids' shoes, but against the word of a rising star cop and the chief of police, she was nothing. I spent the next 30 years building a life on top of that grave. I got promoted. I married a good woman. We had a daughter, Clara. I became the man people turned to when they needed the truth. Sometimes, at night, I'd sit on the porch and watch the fog. I'd listen for the sound of a red Mustang's engine. I'd wait for the ghost of Thomas Miller to come walking up my driveway with his lunchbox and his spilled coffee. But he never came. The world just kept turning. I thought I had gotten away with it. I really did. Then came Leo. Leo is my grandson, my daughter Clara's only child. He was born with a heart that was too small, too weak to push blood through his tiny, perfect body. By the time he was 6, he was living in a hospital bed, tethered to a machine that breathed for him. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, the doctors called it. To me, it looked like a debt. We waited on the transplant list for 2 years. 2 years of watching a child fade away, his skin turning a translucent, ghostly blue. I prayed then. For the first time in decades, I prayed. I told God I'd give anything. I'd confess us. I'd go to prison. Just save the boy. And then the call came. A donor had been found, a young man, barely 20, killed in a freak accident. The surgery was a miracle. Leo woke up with a chest that hummed with a stranger's rhythm. He got his color back. He started to laugh again. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I thought, this is it. This is the grace. This is the universe balancing the scales. But the universe doesn't balance scales. It just waits for the most painful moment to remind you of what you owe. A month after Leo came home, Clara brought over a box of things. The hospital had started a legacy program connecting donor families with recipients if both sides agreed. I wrote to them, Dad, she told me, her eyes shining with tears. The family of the boy who saved Leo, they wrote back, they're such good people. They lost their son. they're so happy Leo is alive. She handed me a letter and a photograph of the donor. His name was Caleb, she said. I looked at the photo. He had the same eyes, the same jawline. He looked exactly like the man I had dragged into the shadows 40 years ago. The name at the bottom of the letter wasn't Miller. It was different. But then I saw the mother's maiden name mentioned in the text. Thomas Miller's daughter had grown up. She had married. She had a son. And now her father's blood, the blood of the man I had branded a drunk and a fool, was pumping inside my grandson's chest. I sit by Leo's bed while he sleeps, and I listen to it. Thump, 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 thump. It's a strong, steady sound. It doesn't belong in this house. It belongs in a house 40 miles down the coast, in a home that I dismantled piece by piece with a single typed report. The letter from Caleb's mother, Thomas Miller's daughter, is sitting on my nightstand. Her name is Mary. She was 5 years old when I told the world her father was a drunk who wandered into the dark. In her letter, she wrote about how hard her mother worked after the accident. She wrote about how they lost the house because there was no life insurance payout for a death caused by contributory negligence. She wrote that they grew up ashamed. She said her father's memory was a shadow they could never step out of until Caleb. Caleb was the one who was supposed to restore the family name. He was a straight-A student. He didn't drink. He was everything his grandfather supposedly wasn't. I look at my hands in the dim light of the hallway. They look like an old man's hands, liver spots, thin skin, but I can still feel the weight of Thomas Miller's coat. I can still feel the damp wool as I dragged him across the asphalt. There's a truth I haven't even told the silence of this room. When I reached down to grab his shoulders that night, when I first touched him, he wasn't dead. His chest moved, just a flutter, a small hitched sob of a breath that rattled in his throat. If I had called for the ambulance right then, if I had focused on the life in front of me instead of the career in my head, but I saw the chief's car lights in the distance. I saw the girl sobbing in the Mustang. I saw a future where I was a hero who protected his own. I waited. I stood over him in the fog and I waited for that rattling breath to stop. I watched the life leave him because a living man can testify. A living man can say, I was in a crosswalk. I didn't just frame a dead man. I ensured he was dead so I could frame him. I've spent 40 years telling myself the impact killed him instantly. I've repeated that lie so many times it became a part of my own skeleton. But now, his grandson's heart is beating 3 feet away from me. It's like the man is back. He's inside my family. He's found a way to haunt me from the inside out. Clara wants us to meet them. They want to hear Leo's heart, Dad, she whispered to me this morning. They want to come over next Sunday. They said it would help them close the circle. Close the circle. She doesn't know that if that circle closes, it will be around my neck. I can't look at Mary Miller. I can't look at the woman whose life I bled dry and tell her I'm grateful for her son's heart. How do you thank a person for a gift you stole 40 years before it was given? Every time Leo laughs, I hear a ghost. Every time he runs, I see a man lying in the weeds. I'm a retired officer of the law. I'm a pillar of the community, and I am terrified of a 5-year-old boy's heartbeat. I thought about burning the letter. I thought about telling Clara we weren't ready. But then I looked at the photo of Caleb again. There was something in the background of that picture, something that made my blood turn to ice. Caleb was standing in front of an old garage, and sitting in the driveway, half covered by a blue tarp, was a red Mustang. The doorbell didn't ring. It was a soft, tentative knock, like someone asking permission to enter a room where a body was being laid out. Clara went to the door, her face radiant with a terrible, misplaced hope. I stayed in the kitchen, my hand gripping the edge of the countertop until my knuckles turned white. My heart, my own old tired heart, was hammering against my ribs, trying to escape the cage of my chest. I heard the voices first. "Thank you for coming," Clara whispered. "Please come in. This is Leo." Then a woman's voice, soft, shaky. He looks so much like Caleb at that age." I forced myself to walk into the living room. Mary Miller was there. She was older, her face lined with the kind of sorrow that becomes a permanent feature, like a scar. But she wasn't alone. Standing behind her, looking at the floor, was a woman in an expensive wool coat, a woman with blonde hair that had faded to a dull chemical silver. It was Sarah. I felt the world tilt. Sarah looked up and her eyes met mine. There was no recognition for the others, but between us, there was a lightning strike of history. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like a ghost. "Elias," she whispered. Clara looked between us, confused. "You two know each other?" I was the officer who handled her father's precinct," I managed to say. The lie felt like ash in my mouth. Mary Miller stepped forward, her eyes wet. "Sarah has been a godsend to us, Elias. After my father died, after the scandal, Sarah reached out. She supported us for 40 years. She paid for Caleb's college. She's the reason we survived." I looked at Sarah. She hadn't been paying for college out of kindness. She had been buying a silence that I had already gifted her for free. She had been living in a prison of her own making, feeding the family of the man she killed to keep the demons at bay. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came when Mary sat down on the sofa and pulled out a manila envelope. "The police, they still haven't found the person who hit Caleb," Mary said, her voice breaking. "It was a hit and run on that same stretch of Blackwood Road, just like my father, only this time there were no witnesses, no one to help." I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. "The police said the car that hit him was a high-performance vehicle," Mary continued. "Red paint chips were found in his jacket." I looked at Sarah. Her hands were shaking. She was looking at Leo, at the boy who lived because Caleb died. "Sarah was with him that night," Mary said. "She was driving him home because his car was in the shop. She said they got into an argument. He got out of the car to walk, and then she lost sight of him." I walked toward the window, parked in my driveway right behind Mary's modest sedan, was a modern red sports car, a Mustang. I looked at the front fender. It was pristine, too pristine. It had been freshly painted, the smell of chemicals still clinging to it in the salt air. I looked back at Sarah. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at Clara. And Clara, my daughter, my perfect, innocent daughter, she wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking at me with a look of pure, calculated understanding. "Dad," Clara said, her voice terrifyingly steady. "Sarah told me everything the night it happened. She called me before she called anyone else. She knew Leo was at the top of the list. She knew Caleb was a match." The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thump-thump of Leo's heart as he sat on the floor playing with a toy car. "She didn't leave him, Dad," Clara whispered, stepping closer to me. "She just waited. She waited to call it in until she knew it was too late to save the brain, but just in time to save the heart." I looked at my daughter and I didn't see the child I raised. I saw myself. I saw the man who moved a body in the fog. I hadn't just saved Sarah 40 years ago. I had taught my own child that a life is something you can trade for your own comfort. I had taught her that silence is a weapon. Leo stood up and walked over to Sarah. He took her hand. "Why are you crying?" he asked. Sarah looked at me, a hollow, dead smile on her face. "Because I finally paid the debt, Elias," she whispered. "Didn't I?" I looked at Mary Miller, who was smiling at my grandson, unaware that she was sitting in a room full of monsters who had harvested her family twice over. I wanted to scream. I wanted to arrest them all. I wanted to arrest myself. But if I spoke, Leo's heart would still be stolen. If I spoke, the life I had built would vanish into the fog. So I did what I have always done. I sat down. I poured the tea, and I listened to the sound of a dead man's heart beating in my house, fueled by a murder I helped commit 40 years before it even happened. Destiny doesn't balance the scales. It just makes sure you're alive